for posterity.
Okay, well, we're here with Sam Rosen
Oh, keeps going.
and Sue Singer,
I hope you didn't
Bubba's
get that.
brother and sister, my long-lost relatives here. So I
I
thought
hope you didn't get that.
Sam's here from
You did.
Naples, Florida. I didn't even know Bubba had a brother. But maybe you can kind of both maybe just kind of tell us about some things maybe in the olden days that I kind of missed out on or didn't know. And
Two youngest of the bunch, pardon me, two youngest of the bunch, 6 years apart. We were all left home a lot together because everybody else had to work. So we were the closest of all the kids.
and you both, how many children were there?
That time,
I mean, all together in
7.
your family.
There were 10 pregnancies, 8 children lived out of the 10 pregnancies. The 5 children born in Europe all lived, and they were all delivered by midwife. The 5 children born here, 2 of them didn't live, and the 5 children here in the United States were all delivered in the hospital. So go figure. So my brother Jay, who was 10 years older than I, Sam, 6 years older than I, and I were the 3 born in this country, in the United States.
And then,
the ones born in Europe, 4, several years apart, like 4 or 5. None of us are close together out of all those children.
then when you came, used to be a doctor then in the States here?
Myself,
Yeah.
yes, my brother, Jake, I call him, and I were doctors. The oldest brother, Meyer, skilled tailor, with especially women's suits. He owned a patent for making the collars on women's suits the way he stitched them. That saved his company that he worked for money. Others had to put a lot of stiffening in the collar. His patent didn't. So he always worked, even through the Depression. When everybody else was kind of starving, Meyer, they didn't make a living as far as that goes.
Want to show you pictures? I don't know if the video will pick this up, but this was Rose before she was married.
I can get that in there.
This is Sam, 3 years old, brother Sam now. My mother. This is my mother, Settle Rosen. My mother, myself when I was about 5. My mother. My father, Penachus Pete Rosen. My daughter, Beverly Heiken Burke, who was about 8 years old at this time. And my mother. This was at a Passover Seder at my parents' apartment.
What year was that?
My daughter now is about 50 years ago. So it would have been about 1849, 1850.
Before I was born?
19.
I mean 19.
Oh.
Sorry.
Well, maybe you can tell me about your parents, because I didn't know any of them. They passed away before I was born.
Okay, I think
The good and the bad. And
Right. I think Paul was named after my father, Penchas P. My parents' marriage was arranged in Poland. They were from a little town called Opt and Lutz in Poland, and my father and mother never saw each other except once when the marriage was arranged. My father was 17, my mother was 20. The day of the wedding, they couldn't find my father. He really didn't want to get married at 17, and they went looking for him, and they found him hiding under a stoop, which is a stairwell, and they dragged him to the wedding. The wedding lasted over 50 years and 10 pregnancies. They then moved to Warsaw, and my mother's brother, Max Gersh, had come to Kansas City, Kansas, and he sent money to bring my father over from Poland. And my father was here for 3 years before he could send for my mother. My mother then and father had 5 children. She went to leave, and they wouldn't let them leave because Meyer, the oldest son, had some kind of a breaking out on his head, and the authorities said either the whole family had to stay or he would have to stay. And my mother and the other 4 could come. She thought about it, and she decided to leave Meyer with her parents in Warsaw, Poland, and she came over steerage by ship with the children. And then they weren't, and Meyer was about 9 years old, I think, at the time they left him. And they, for some reason, because the war broke out in Europe and then the war broke out in the States, they didn't bring him over until he was 19 years old to the United States. But my father came over with $3 in his pocket, could not speak the language. First job he took was as a night watchman because he didn't have to speak. And then I don't remember how, or he never said, how he evolved into being a shoemaker. Did he ever say anything to you,
No.
Sammy? But that's what he did. He learned how to repair shoes. He bought a building on 4th in Minnesota in Kansas City, Kansas. My mother and father and the 4 children at that time, lived in back of the store. And my father was really not a hard worker. He would rather work with his mind. He was a Talmudic student, very well versed in Jewish and Hebrew. And my father used to like to go and visit the other merchants, so he'd leave my mother in the store. Sammy, this is the stories that my mother would tell me. Sammy was a baby. Customer would come in and want to look at a pair of shoes, and Mama would hand Sammy, the baby, to the customer to hold while she went and looked for shoes. Then a customer would come in and ask for the shoes that they had left to be repaired, and my father would never repair them when he was supposed to. He'd throw them out in the backyard, so she had to go out and hustle up the shoes and find him and have him fix it. And but eventually they accumulated and saved, and they bought a house on 4th in Nebraska. And my mother said, I think the house was like $3,500 at the time, and to my parents that was like a mansion in those days. And my father always said, what is a poor schlepper like him doing in a house like that? Kind of made her life miserable. They finally sold the house. Then they rented another house on 5th and Washington Boulevard. And then we lived at another house on 8th and Ann. The only place standing left is 8th and Ann. The other places have been leveled and made parking lots. They then bought another store on 5th and Minnesota, and that was like a general merchandise store, basically men's work clothes. My father also, he would save every penny that he could and invest in real estate. He bought a hotel on Minnesota Avenue called the Palace Hotel, and he just gradually just kept increasing that way. Now, what do you remember?
Palace Hotel had 3 or 4 floors with a barber shop on the first ground floor, and must have been like 10 or 20 rooms on every floor, but 1 bathroom. That was the way it was. We were kids. I had a Buster Brown haircut, which my dad cut with a bowl on our head. And to start kindergarten, Kansas City, Kansas, he took me to the barber across the street, and the barber didn't cut much hair off. I remember I cried and cried because I thought it still was a Buster Brown. And I'm trying to think of some things
Okay.
here.
Well, Rose Silverman, my mother said, was a real balabusta. She could clean, cook, bake, take care of the kids. And so my mother really did depend upon her to stay in the house and do that because my mother had to help my father in the store. My sister Mary was about 2 years younger than Rose. And no matter what Mary did, it never pleased Rose. It never was done good enough. So they decided to separate the two girls, and they sent Mary out to work in a grocery when she was about 9 or 10 years old. Rose and Mary never got to go to high school. After grade school, they had to quit. Rose, I think, to stay home and take care of the kids and help my mother, and Mary to work. Then I remember my mother telling me about Rose and Morris getting married, and they lived with my parents, and at that time, because they couldn't afford an apartment or to live by themselves, and Rose got pregnant with Sylvia. My mother got pregnant with me, and she was embarrassed to tell anybody in the family, especially Rose, her daughter, that she was going to have a baby too. And my mother was short and kind of heavy and wore these big dresses, house dresses, so you really couldn't tell that she was pregnant. Rose went to the hospital to deliver Sylvia. A mutual friend of Rose's and my mother told Rose, because my mother confided in this friend that she was pregnant, she went to the hospital and told Rose, "Do you know your mother's going to have a baby in a few weeks?" Well, Rose, of course, that was a shock to her. So 5 weeks after Sylvia was born, I was born, and we all lived in the same house on 4th in Nebraska. And Rose used to, my mother told me these stories. Of course, I didn't remember, I wouldn't have remembered from infancy. But if Rose would bathe Sylvia, my mother would ask her to bathe me, and she would do it, but with resentment. And it was kind of like she was upset because my being born took away from Sylvia, the first grandchild, because my mother had to do things for me that Rose felt she would have done for Sylvia if I hadn't been born. So she used to always say to my mother, "You do everything for Sue, everything for Sue." And my mother said to her, "Well, Sue is my child. I have to do for her. Are you going to take care of her if I don't?" Well, Rose and Morris and Sylvia moved out finally to a place of their own. We lived in Kansas City, Kansas. They moved over, I think it was like around 6th and Garfield, in an apartment. And Rose was struggling financially. My mother helped my dad in the store, had all these children to take care of. She would make baskets of food and take the streetcar and take them over for Rose and her family to have food to eat. My mother was really a very loving, generous, giving person. My father was very stern, and after I became an adult, I began to realize that he felt any show of affection to anybody, especially the children, would mean that he would lose his authority, that he wouldn't be able to maintain being the head of the household. I don't know what else you want to know. I mean, there's so much, and maybe if you'd ask questions, I could
Let me
answer.
say something. Before Rose was married, one of my earliest recollections is, in front of some of her girlfriends her same age, she laid me on her lap and gave me an enema. And the girls laughed at me. That's one of my first
You
recollections.
remember that? Well, how old were you?
Well, I was, what, 4 years old when she got married?
Uh-huh.
That'd be just before that time.
Yeah, right, gosh.
Can I tell about the wedding night? Or?
Anything,
Okay,
yes.
so anyway, my dad always got up early in the morning and always wanted someone to talk to. And I think they were already married, but they spent one night at our house because it was large, 4th in Nebraska. My dad made both Rose and her husband Morris get up and get out of bed. He said, I didn't raise my daughter to stay in bed all day with the man, but he really wanted just someone to talk to. So they went out and I think went to either a hotel or a motel.
But they lived with the folks.
Oh yeah, that way,
when they were
but
there,
they didn't want to stay in the house that next night
yeah. Right,
for
right,
that reason.
right.
And then where the address you said, where they lived, Rose looked out the window one day, and a neighbor girl jumped in the car every morning with Morris when he went somewhere.
With her Morris or,
Yeah,
or
hers.
our brother?
And she really
With
put
her
a,
husband Morris, okay.
she put a stop to that fast.
Well, there were many years when we were a family. We would get together for family events, the entire family. And then I would never know the reason. All of a sudden, you don't hear from Rose and her family. She would always get mad over something, you know, and then we would. But when I was growing up, I guess when I was about 8, 9 years old and started going to Sunday school at Kehileth, Israel, which was at 43rd and Prospect, and Rose lived across the street. They owned a duplex across the street. Well, Sylvia and Dorothy and Melvin was born by then. On Saturdays, my mother used to let me go over to Rose's house to spend the night so I could go to Sunday school with them. So I have a lot of good, fond memories, and we 3 girls shared the same bed, and I can remember Rose would feed us, and she would sit and suck, like if we had chicken. And we always ate before Morris came home from the store, because he would come home late on Saturday night. She would give us good portions to eat, and she'd sit there and suck on a little bone, because she couldn't afford. But so she deprived herself so the children could have. She had many nice, you know, points about her, but somewhere in her she had a deep resentment for some reason. But like I said, I have many fond memories, you know, of Rose. And I don't know what else to say. I don't know if you want me to talk basically about Rose or about my parents.
About the parents and your other brothers and sisters and.
Well, see, by the time I was born, there was about 22 years difference between Meyer, the oldest, and me. So Meyer and Rose were more like aunts and uncles, because I never remember living at home with them. Charles, our brother, who went to Annapolis, and then, I don't know the reason, he switched over and became an Army person, was lost in the war when he was about, what, 36, did you say?
33, I think
33.
David said.
He was being sent back to the United States from Iceland to come back for officer training school, and it was right as the war had first broken out, and his ship was torpedoed off the coast of New England by a German submarine, and he was gone. I was living in Sedalia at the time. My daughter was 6 months old. My parents had a store in Sedalia at that time, and my mother was at my house with me when we got the phone call that what had happened to Charlie. And of course she was devastated. My mother had kept a kosher house up until that time. When that happened, she got disillusioned in God, and she would say to me, see, you got 10 fingers. If you lose any one of those 10, it hurts. It doesn't matter which one you've lost. And she kind of lost a little bit of her religious faith when that happened. I remember my brother Jay, and we'll regress now a little bit. When we were growing up, my mother would leave me at home with Sam as a babysitter for me. But Sam would give me Indian burns on my arm, and he would take me and swing me by an arm and a leg and swing me around and throw me on a couch and maybe sometimes miss the couch.
True.
And of course I would tell Mama these things when she came home. So she said she was fearful to leave me with Sam anymore, but Jay she would trust because Jay was very quiet and you know, and she just felt that I would be safer with him. But Sam was the one that I enjoyed the most because he was the challenge and he was the more fun, and when he didn't pay attention to me, I would do something to irritate him so that he would. Jay, though, was a born teacher. If anybody, I don't care who it was, wanted to listen to him and learn, he would teach you anything that he knew. We lived in Kansas City, Kansas, and we didn't have a car, and the streetcar would go over. We used to call Kansas City, Missouri, going over town. He'd say to me, come on, Sue, I'm going to take you over town and we're going to do something over there. I don't want to go. I get car sick. That streetcar rocks back and forth, and oh, Sue, come on, sit at the front where the door opens all the time. You'll be fine, you'll be fine. Thanks to him, he exposed me to so many things that I became interested in and have a little bit of a knowledge about. And he made me realize a person never needs to be bored. There is so much to do, and I owe him a deep thanks of gratitude for that. And because of that, whenever I have had reared children and I tried to expose them the same way that he exposed me. He was a mentor to me for that. My sister Mary was a real love of a person. As I said, she was the order was, Meyer was the oldest, Rose, Mary, Morse, Charlie, Jay, Sam, and then me. My sister Mary was almost like a second mother to me, only in the fact that if there was a school function and my mother didn't feel like she wanted to go with me because she wanted to stay in the store, she would send Mary. People thought eventually that Mary was my mother. There was about 16, 17 years difference there. As Mary got older, we became even closer, and after she lost her husband, Ben Bodney, she became very dependent upon me. And towards the end of her life, she was like my other person. I knew everything about Mary, inside and out. I knew every inch of her body. I knew everything she was thinking. I knew everything about her. And she's been gone now 5 years, and I do miss her terribly. Morris, I don't have too many memories of when I was growing up. Morse was gone from home quite a bit. I don't know if you want to tell about Morse or not, but anyway, he was kind of the black sheep, the really black sheep of the family. And then, of course, I've told you about Jay. Jay got married quite young, but I guess we all got married quite young. Jay married Betty, who was a big asset to our family. Even though my father was disappointed, he thought if he's sending a son to college to be a doctor, he should marry someone like a daughter of Kat's drugstore. He had high aspirations for Jay. And Jay married a woman, Betty, who is so fantastic. She really kept our family together. She was always there for all of us, she and her family. Then Sam, I can remember when Sammy, it was a Friday night and Mama had lit the Shabbos candles and we had had Friday night dinner, and Sam starts packing and Papa says to him, "What are you packing? Where are you going?" And Sam says, "I'm leaving." "What do you mean you're leaving? Where are you going?" "Well, I'm married. I'm leaving." "Married? Who did you marry?" And Sam tells he married a non-Jewish girl. Well, of course, that didn't sit well with my father, and I'm going to let Sam tell that part of it.
He sat me down and gave me heck for 3 hours in Jewish, pausing every 15 minutes. "You understand Jewish?" "Yeah." Then he started on me again. Because he could talk, never say the same word twice for a long, long time. But getting back to Morris Silverman, he always had a cigar in his mouth. I don't know if he slept with a cigar in his mouth or not. And he had a type of a clothing store and actually kind of a pawn shop together. I imagine it's about 20th and Main Street. And once in a while, I would stop in and talk to him. And he told me that during the Second World War, he was just a short walk from Union Station at large railroad stations. And any military man coming home on leave, on the way had to walk past his store to get towards downtown Kansas City. And they would stop in to get a fresh change of clothes, and they would leave their old stuff with him. And he would dry clean it, but they never seemed to come back and take it. But anyway, between them buying new clothes and him selling the older clothes as used clothes, he made some money during the war, and he was investigated, he told me, by Internal Revenue. He hadn't paid income tax for years, all of a sudden he's reporting a big income. Of course, they figure he's like a bootlegger or something. So, the war's over, he didn't pay so much income tax again.
What colony are we in?
Hmm?
Johnson.
She's on the phone. But anyway, as Sue said, Rose actually kind of raised me until I started school, because, I mean, she was home, Rose was home, and my parents were both working. And my father was very strong-willed. If he didn't like you today, he wouldn't like you a century from now. And he let you know about it. But somehow he alienated, even in his own family, like brother against brother, sister against sister. And we hardly ever had company, because sooner or later he'd tell them what he thought about them, you know, and they never came back. And even today, I am myself not used to entertaining, although Sue is more gregarious, I guess they call it, than I am. But one thing about my father, you could depend on him. If you got in trouble, he'd go to bat for you. If you asked him for a loan or money, he never got it. But like I say, he really needed help otherwise. I lived in, I was only one of the family ever left Kansas City. I lived in southwest Nebraska as a doctor, and had a really hard time getting started. And I would take the train from where I lived through St. Joe down to Kansas City, and I would sheepishly ask for a loan or money or something. He always seemed to give me exactly what my train fare was. I broke even every time I came. I don't know how he knew how much to give me, but it seemed, at least I got a trip out of it.
Well, Papa was a businessman. At 17, I got married, and I told Papa I was going to get married to Carl. And of course, Papa at that point said he didn't want me getting married at 17. So he said, I'll send you to college and I'll buy you a convertible, which I knew he wouldn't do. He was just using that as a ploy. So finally, when he realized I was serious about getting married, he said, I'm going to give you $1,000 as a gift. But I'm going to give you $500 at the wedding, and if you're still married a year from now, I'll give you the other $500, which he did. But Sam is right. Papa was never affectionate, and you couldn't ask him any questions because he would get upset, although he used to kind of say he couldn't understand it. The children that were born in Europe were very respectful. They were quiet, good. He couldn't understand the 3 children in the United States. We talked back to him or gave him some kind of an argument, but down deep I knew that he really did like that. He admired us for that. The only time he would let me kiss him was after he suffered his heart attack, which was a fatal heart attack. He lived a few weeks after that. And that was the very first time he ever let me get near him to give him a kiss. I would be playing outside in front of wherever we lived. He would be walking home from work, from the streetcar line, would walk by me as if he didn't know who I was, that I was a perfect stranger, would never acknowledge me. And of course my friends would say, isn't that your father? And I'd say yes, or, well, I said, that's just the way he is. But we understood him. We also knew which button not to push on him, too, you know, to not get him upset at us. But Mama used to argue with him all the time, and when he was quiet, she would always say something to stir him up again. And I used to say to her, he was quiet, why didn't you leave him alone? She says, leave me alone, I know what I'm doing. Well, as I got older, I began to realize that was her fun and games. That was her entertainment. And that was their means of communication, was constantly arguing. But Sammy was sick with scarlet fever. When you were how old?
About 12.
12. So we weren't supposed to be in the house, but my parents didn't send me away. But when I would see, at that time doctors made house calls. When I would see a doctor coming, I would hide so he wouldn't realize I was in the house. As soon as he'd leave, I would jump on the bed, I would play with him, I did everything. Then I have a vivid memory of Papa, and my father's hands were short and stubby. He was kind of a stocky man. and he had this pill that looked like a horse pill to me, and he pushes it in Sammy's mouth, and he pushes the pill down with his finger, and Sammy's having a hard time swallowing it, and he's yelling, "You want to die? You want to die? Take this pill." And I thought, my gosh, I mean, to do that to a child. But then, like I said, when you grow up with parents a certain way, you understand this is the way they are. And then as you get older and you go to other people's houses, you begin to see how other parents are. But I still never felt, well, I wish my parents were different. I don't understand that, why I didn't feel that way. But I think that maybe I was treated a little differently too, being the youngest and the last one at home than maybe the other sisters and brothers were. I think by the time I was born, they were tired and worn out. I never had a curfew when I dated. I was allowed to do a lot of things that they probably weren't allowed to do. But I never abused it either. But my parents passed away 5 months from each other. My father had a heart attack, would not go to the hospital, would not even see a doctor. My brother Jay diagnosed it as a heart attack, couldn't get him to a doctor. And I remember Jay bringing in oxygen for him. And my father was getting better. And one night he went to bed, and he didn't wake up. He had a very peaceful passing. And my sister lived across the hall from my parents, and she used to come in there every morning to help my mother. And Mama said to Mary, "Go wake up Papa, he hasn't got up yet for breakfast," and she found him. 5 months later, my mother passed away, and she had always been fearful that she would pass away all alone, nobody being there. She was diabetic, and I got a call when I was fixing dinner one evening from Mary to come quickly. There's something wrong with Mama. So I was married to Carl at that time. Carl, Beverly, and I went over there. Jay was already there. An ambulance was there with the people from the ambulance. And Jay was cradling my mother, and she was talking. And then just as I'm talking to you, her lungs filled up and she was gone. And she was surrounded by all of us, so thank goodness she wasn't alone.
Except me.
But well,
I wasn't there.
You weren't there. But what I'm going to say is they both passed, they didn't suffer. They never laid and suffered like so many people do today. So for that, I think we have to be grateful. My mother was 75 and my father was 72 when they passed away. But they had a very colorful life. They've left lots of children. And of course, I'm not going to go into what the court case was that really put the rift in the family. But now that it's just Sam and I left, and Sam is here visiting me with his wife, Mary Lou, from Naples, Florida, and I have called all the children from all the brothers and sisters. Not one said they weren't interested in coming over, and I can't tell you what that has meant to me. And they've all come over to visit, and we've now got a family. I think it's wonderful that all the children, apparently all these years, also wanted family. But it didn't, thank goodness it has happened now, and I'm very grateful for it. And it's beautiful. They're all beautiful people. And Paul is taping this for us, doing this video, which I think is just lovely. I really appreciate it.
Rose Silverman, when I was young, was a real good cook, homekeeper, made quilts. She would somehow crochet a soft basket to hold flowers, and then they would starch it or soak it in heavy sugar solution, and when it dried it was stiff. And she used to win prizes. I don't know whether it was a night school or something, in baking, making things. And like she'd take a quilt, and when I call it crocheting, she put the face of a girl on it, a large size. But it seemed like she was always winning prizes for things that she did.
When Sammy was a teenager, he was very good artistically. I don't know if you're getting this picture or not. But this is a self-portrait of Sam that he did. Was this pencil? with pencil. When he graduated Westport High School, for the yearbook, they had him do drawings of the statue like the Scout and the Pioneer Mother for the yearbook. He sent away, I guess he answered an ad or something for Disney, Walt Disney, and they wrote him back that they were interested in him, for him to come out for an interview. But I think you said
Had to pay my own way.
had to pay his own train fare. He
And
asked Papa, go ahead, you tell
If
the
it
story.
went over, why, they'd give me my train fare back. But Papa wouldn't take the chance of giving me the money.
Well, not only that, but Papa said artists were bums.
Yeah, bums.
Also tell them how you became a doctor, why you went to school, medical
Because
school.
of my brother Jay, who already was going to school. I used to help my father in a store down on really about 7th and Main Street. And he came in one day and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I says, "I'm working." He said, "How come you're not in school?" I said, You told me I couldn't go to school." "Who told you you couldn't go to school?" He wrote me a check for $125. That's how I started school. And because of my brother Jay, who already kind of worked things out, they let me start college even though it was already started 6 weeks. And that's actually how I started on that score.
And tell them how old you are today.
81, I'll soon be 82 years old.
What is this, April the 20th? 1999. This is a picture of my parents. And from these two people, I wouldn't be able to even judge how many we would have as a family. Probably over 100 if we all got together. And we owe them a lot. Sam always said to me, the best gift a parent can give a child is a good mind and a good body. And we are very grateful to our parents for that.
I used to write a letter to my mother every week. And either Sue or Mary, my sister, would read it to him. And I kept bringing that out on every letter I wrote. And I'm just trying to think too. I myself have, I think I have 6 grandchildren, thinking real quick, and about 8 great-grandchildren. And I know all the rest of us. So like Sue says, there's quite a family
That's right.
that's spread out.
I have one daughter, a birth daughter. She's married to Norman, Beverly Burke, married to Norman Burke. 2 children, Ron Burke and Steve Burke. They are both married, Ron to Debbie, Steve to Amy. Steve and Amy will be having a baby in May or June. I remarried and I reared 2 children. Sarah was 8.5, Steve was 5.5 when I married their father. They are now adults. Sarah has 2 children, Evan and Garrett, 14 and 12. And so I feel I have a beautiful family, an immediate family, but now I have all these other young people in my life, and I do love family.
Our dad didn't want any of us to have anything to do with Gentiles except in the business-wise. I know I could never bring anybody home. Like I met him at the drugstore or something like that, you know. But he didn't dare bring a Gentile home. And same as Sue said, I'd be playing on Minnesota Avenue with some young boys my age. My dad walked right by us, and the kids would say, "Is that your dad?" "Yeah." He never even said anything. Well, I said, "That's the way we are." I had an emergency type of operation when I was about 16. My dad came to see me, visit me for 2 hours, and all he said at first was, "How you feeling?" I said, "All right." He never said another word, neither did I, for 2 hours. And when he left, the nurse says, "Is your dad deaf and dumb?" I said, "No, that's just the way he is, and I am too." We both said what we thought, and it was over. but I was operated on in a Catholic hospital, and my dad made him take all the crucifixes off the wall, all the pictures of Christ with his heart sticking out there. And one time, someone gave us a Spanish galleon to sit on the radio. Well, it had a Maltese cross on the sails, but my dad, instead of throwing it out, had me paint the Maltese cross out. It was too good a thing to throw away in that score. When I had my surgery, I had enough money to pay for the operation. My dad paid for the hospital, but my father would let me pay the surgeon all in one lump sum. I paid it in monthly sums for 10 months. My father's reasoning was that the doctor might die and I wouldn't have to pay the rest of the bill. And I've heard that kind of a logic from so many old country people who came to America.
Well, I'm going to tell a funny about Sam now. Sam has a fantastic, quick wit. He really could be a stand-up comic. Right now he's being very serious. My mother was diabetic. Jay would come over every day and give her her insulin shot, and she would complain to him about her aches and pains. And he'd say, "Mama, you're getting old. It's old age." And she said, she didn't want to hear that. Oh, she says, "You wait. When Sammy comes, Sammy will have a cure for me. Sammy will make me feel better." Well, Sammy finally came to visit. She gives him her complaints. He looks at her and he says, "Mama, you know how lucky you are? If you were an Eskimo and living in Alaska, they would put you out on an iceberg and ship you out. That's what they would do with you at your age." Ah, she says, "This is what I waited for to hear." But this is Sammy's sense of humor. Sammy is very quick-witted. He's a delight to be with. We have been talking nonstop, the two of us, with everything, family, reminiscence, daily
Both
events.
at the same time.
Yes, we step on each other's words, but it's been such a wonderful visit. I am so grateful for it, and I said it's a wonderful tribute to Sammy that everybody I have called wants to come and see him, meet him, and visit with him.
Well, I guess you'll be headed back in a couple days.
Well, that's
Sammy's going on a motorhome trip to Alaska. Now he's remarkable. His son David has a motorhome, and Sam and Mary Lou are leaving here. Today is Tuesday. They're leaving Thursday for St. Louis on Amtrak to a wedding, to Sam's granddaughter's wedding in St. Louis. And then about a month from now, he will be going, he will fly to Detroit and meet David and go to Alaska with David and his wife. And I think that's amazing.
my wife and I are going to St. Louis to attend my granddaughter's wedding. She is 1/4 Jewish, 1/2 colored. She's marrying an Irish Catholic, so it's going to be kind of interesting. I don't know if my father, they always say, will he turn over in his grave or not?
Yeah. My father, one of his pet expressions was, "If you can raise 8 children and not end up in jail or with a nervous breakdown, you are made of steel."
When my father got upset, he would say he wished that the boat had sunk before he got to America. And when he did come over, he was so poor, the cattle were on one deck higher than he was.
It became below steerage.
But when we talk about steerage, that's the part of the ship where you see all the chains and the anchors. And they used to sit out there all on the entire trip over. I don't know how they ate or how they went to the bathroom. No, they never did tell us that. But they spent the entire trip exposed to the weather.
Well, sometimes when I've gone through some tough times in my life, some tough events, I think about my mother. And the life that she led and the strength that she showed, and that gives me my strength.
Well, hopefully you'll come back. Sue's always here. I didn't even know where you lived. But
Right.
hopefully we'll see you'll come back soon, Sam, and with your wife.
He said he'll come back for my 80th birthday.
Yours.
That's what you
38.
said, my 80th.
Oh, yours.
Mine.
Oh, thought you meant me.
No, mine.
I have a liaison with a high school girl that was always a little too fast for me. She said when we're 80, she would acquiesce to me. I know where she lives and all, but I'm not going to look her up. She lives in Wichita, Kansas. But I remember it. See, I know she remembers it. That's a joke when she said 80. Kind of reminded me of that.
Okay, well, we'll see you later.
Shalom.
Cameras